everyone, and welcome back to the Property Marketing Lounge after our short summer break. For those that don't know, I'm Deanie Lee, and with Sarah Canning, we are the Property Marketing Strategists. We run this webinar series as part of our recent research project, The Future of Home According to Gen Z, which we have partnered with the wonderful UPP to bring this piece of research to really understand what young people want from a home. We've done a kind of independent survey across 2,500 young people, so that's 16 to 18-year-olds, current students and graduates, and really delved into a number of different topics on kind of what the home should be for them, what they're looking for, and what they are willing to pay for. We have a full research report coming out at the end of the year, and this is themed around 5 different pillars, of which there is sustainability, affordability, wellbeing, community, and technology. And once again, big thank you to UPP, our partner, to share our vision in getting this research out to the sector, and also Dataloft for their help in analysing the results. Today, we are all about wellbeing. We've got so much data that we're doing one big report at the end of the year, and we're doing lots of mini reports as we lead up to that. And we've just released the Wellbeing report, which has been sponsored by our wonderful partner, UCAS. So you can download that report now on our website. And today we'll be talking about all important topic about how homes and environments can support young people as part of their well-being. So we just are going to do a quick round the world, and we've got a wonderful panel with you today. So we'll do a quick kind of round the virtual sofa of all our panels to allow them to introduce ourselves. And then without further ado, we'll crack on with today's session. So Jon, can I come to you first, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jon Wakeford. I'm Director of Engagement at the University Partnerships Programme. I've been in student accommodation since the mid-90s. I think started in an operational role and then joined UPP right at the beginning when there's only 3 or 4 of us, and subsequent to that I've been on the UPP journey for the last 20 or so years, and we've invested £3.5 billion in the sector since those, and we're currently operating 35,000 rooms. So this stuff, community and well-being is at the heart of what we do. Great,
thank you. And Joanne.
Hi everyone, there's 2 Joannas.
Joanne from UCAS, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Jo Richards. I'll be Jo for ease of comparison between Joanna and Jo's. So I've been with UCAS just a few months now, but I've spent my career researching student decision making, what makes students choose one route over another. We were super excited to sponsor this as UCAS because we've seen the importance of accommodation and wellbeing in those decisions really grow in importance over the past few years, and we wanted to help raise awareness of the steps that can be taken to improve student wellbeing across the student experience, and some really interesting results coming out of this.
Great, thank you. And Joanna from Fitwell.
Hi, good morning. So I'm joining you from New York, as you can maybe tell from the sirens. So I am the president and CEO of Active Design Advisors, Inc. And we are the operator of Fitwell, which is a healthy building certification and tech platform where we take public health research from around the globe and translate it into practical design and operational strategies that have a direct impact not only on the health of occupants, but also on the value of real estate. So we are part of that whole ESG discussion that everybody's having, as well as directly, obviously, impacting health and value. So great to join you. We work a lot in the UK, so it's wonderful to be able to have this discussion with you.
Great, that's great, thank you. And Scott.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me along. So I'm Scott, I'm here representing the Class Foundation. So we are a European-wide group. We host a number of regional events and our big annual conference in November. And we are involved in this discussion because we ran a pilot piece of research back in 2021 in the Netherlands, which is where we're based, looking at the relationship between student accommodation and well-being and how it can play an impact on student well-being. The research had an element of shock to it, and we were surprised with some of the things we found, but also some bright shoots. And when you think of the timing of that, perhaps inevitably students were under extreme pressure sort of through last year, and we're really excited that we're taking the research across the whole of Europe imminently. So we're sort of launching our our research project and hoping to roll that out to students before the end of the year with the findings early next year. So lots to sort of input, we hope, on the pilot survey and talk about what we might try and discover in the future. And just last week we ran a wellbeing panel at our London regional forum, which was very well received, and some good insight from operators and universities alike last week as well.
That's great, thank you. And as I said, so a really brilliant panel with you today. Just for our audience, please, if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A and we will try and put those to the panel throughout the session. And I will hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Deanie, and thank you all. So let's get straight into it. I think it's important to see if we're on the sort of level playing field or not, and that's fine. So what does, well-being in the home mean to all of you? Scott, you go first.
Yeah, well, my background is in operations, and both at site level and then into sort of regional and national roles with some of the larger providers. So instantly, as I was sort of thinking about this question, you think of the negative side and the times things went wrong. But I think we're turning that conversation around how we can properly support this, and how we can I suppose we're understanding the importance of that living environment. And I think that's where the research we're doing has really kind of started to show that, in that it's not just about the space. I think the conversations I've had in putting together the project is around the element of service and the relationship between the building. So for me, really, the sort of first thing I wrote down was connections, and a whole sort of raft of things around that. But yeah, I think the living environment, being able to facilitate those connections, but having people, particularly for students, having people there who are there to look after you and look out for you more so than perhaps in other types of housing, are very much important aspects for me.
Thank you. Jo, do you have anything to add? What does well-being in the home mean to you?
They're quite similar, really. I think, firstly, when thinking about well-being in student accommodations, I think sometimes that specific support really comes to mind. So thinking about the wellbeing representatives that Scott mentioned, perhaps maybe exercise facilities, the wellbeing events. But I think this research has really shown that it's much more baked into the overall experience. So things like the holistic experience, the customer service, things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with wellbeing are actually coming out quite strongly as impacting it. We've done quite a bit of research into wellbeing and accommodation as well through UCAS, and we've seen that actually things like the general standard of accommodation and the cost of living are absolutely of high importance when we ask students what they think has the biggest impact on their wellbeing within accommodation. So I think that kind of holistic approach is something that springs to mind, having looked at the research.
Thank you. And Joanna?
Yeah, I'd love to kind of add on that. And I would say that what we know from that global evidence base, so in our systems, we have 5,600 peer-reviewed research studies from institutions around the world, right? So this is a very well-researched subject. So we know, because of that all aspects of our built environment, so the design of where we live, the design of the neighborhoods, the buildings themselves, the operation, how well maintained they are, we know quantifiably that they impact all aspects of health, right? We can say that as a statement. We know that from public health research, but as real estate folks, which is what I am, not a public health person, we don't necessarily have that knowledge at our fingertips. So where the knowledge is out there, the academic understanding is out there from public health research, it hasn't necessarily made it through to the decision makers who are forming and informing our built environment. So I think just for everyone to know that your built environment absolutely quantifiably impacts your mental health, your physical health, and your social health, whether you know it or not, it does. So I think this is the big change that we've seen from our perspective, and that is before COVID, health was seen as a nice to have, a cherry on top, something you did once you'd done everything else. Health is now seen as essential because everybody is demanding it. And so we can kind of continue to talk about that and what that means for value. But it's an exciting moment because I think this body of knowledge from public research is now available to us in the building industry. So we don't have to start from scratch, right? We already know quantifiably how to do this. So it's really now a case of really doing it. And so it's a good moment.
Absolutely. And Jon, in your experience, what does well-being in the home mean to you?
Well, I think for UPP, so normally we're based at the heart of campus. So we have we've approached this from a very sort of integrated position with our university partners. So, for example, we like to ensure that our services teams are actually working with the university's pastoral care teams. So we make sure that they're on site as well. They have accommodation on site. So we make sure that those two things are integrated. I think we were relatively early starters in this area. I think back in 2015, we recognised that we were here doing more than just operating rooms, and I think we started some of the early work with Student Minds at Nottingham Trent University, where we undertook a pilot scheme which was called Student Living, and that was a residential based project, and it was about helping our teams, universities teams and our teams, really understand the signs of students that were having issues in the living environment, because the residential environment is where a lot of the presenting symptoms of issues are raised, because students often feel that they can't bring them up in an academic sense. So I guess we were quite early to it, and I guess for us it's that binding of the university's duty of care and our duty of care together, so that we can signpost early where students are having problems, and we can also build that into our design as well. I mean, our designs have moved on so far. At the moment, we're just bidding for a final round scheme at Exeter, where we're doing passive house scheme, another 2,000 beds there, and the designs have come so far in the last 2 decades.
Absolutely. And just kind of building on some of what you all covered, really. So what came out very strongly in our research was actually well-being, as you've all said, is at the core of the home rather than it being an add-on. And actually only 16% of our respondents cited events as important to well-being, which is really kind of what we've seen evolve over the last decade, really, within PBSA and Build to Rent as well. So why do you think the industry places such an importance on a programme of events? And have we kind of missed the point on making well-being part of the building infrastructure? Do any of you have anything to say on that?
If I can go first again. I don't think necessarily the events are, I mean, some may, but they're about missing the mark or anything like that. But I think, and perhaps it's the perception of the respondents, that the events have to be part of a package that meet, as we saw in the pandemic, making connections, meeting people, socializing with people is a fundamental part of that. So getting students out of their rooms and finding ways of interacting, not neglecting those who are not going to come to the pizza night or any of those things, that it's really important that we reach those people as well. And there are other ways of doing that, but seeing them as a silver bullet, we put on events, so we're doing a great job in our pastoral care, is definitely not the answer. But that being part of it is part of a step, I suppose, towards getting people out. We talked last week with at the University of Leeds about how they get people out of their rooms and the format of events and the different types of things that they were doing, because there's a lot of pizza on LinkedIn at the moment, isn't there? And how, what else we should be doing to help people properly. But yeah, I think as an initial step of making connections and something for people to start them off is still really, really important, but perhaps not as the answer that perhaps we might have thought it was.
Yeah,
I mean, this is something that we see in across the housing sector, that you have to be getting those fundamentals right. You have to, be really focused on the operation of the buildings, so air quality, sound, insulation, all of the kind of fundamental aspects on the operational side actually are going to have a greater impact on the satisfaction of your residents than those kind of amenity pieces. It's not that they don't impact, it's that if you aren't maintaining that building, and if you aren't providing that basic kind of quality of the built environment, you're not going to be able to overcome that with events. I think that's the thing, right? It builds on that fundamental kind of quality of the housing, whether it's for students or whether it's for older older adults who are out of student accommodation.
Yeah, I think that welcome model, if you, for want of a better term, is spread across a number of different areas. Obviously, I think, there's the welcome and orientation part, and that's the sort of generating belonging, which is really, really key. And then I think we see ourselves as providing life skills as well. So whereas the university might be teaching the academic stuff, we see ourselves as providing lessons in life, for want of a better word. And then there's that community building. So you're building strong and resilient households and thriving student communities. And then there's the celebrating culture. So helping students understand the place that they're living in, the location that they're living in, and celebrating both the UK, the university, and the international university culture. Health and well-being, which we already touched on, and then there's safety and security, which is always a key one, but that is often dealt with by design in particular.
Yeah. And I don't know whether I would say that the industry is missing the mark, because I think the whole purpose of those events is around facilitating that community, and we know how important that is to the whole student experience, that kind of facilitating community, that sense of belonging, and perhaps is thinking about how more broadly about how that community is built, those networks that are established, and trying to enable that. We asked students to tell us what they thought meant, what a good community looked like, and what it meant to them in their accommodation. And what they said is that actually good quality communal space, social space, to really kind of improve those interactions within halls are really important to support their well-being. And so thinking about what types of spaces perhaps could be created to enable that. I think it's also preparing applicants before they arrive to create those networks and what they can expect. So how they can get involved in things like volunteering, the involvement in different halls activities, or even just making sure that they're aware of different university support teams that might be available to them, would all help with that, facilitating that sense of community and that settling in.
Absolutely. So moving kind of away from events, sleep emerged as the biggest impact on young people's well-being in our research. Are you surprised at that? Right.
So I would say, looking at public health research, I am so delighted that this generation is so aware of the impact that good sleep has on overall health generally, right? It impacts all aspects of your health, your physical health, as well as your mental health. But the fact that they identify that as so fundamental to their overall health and well-being it's so good, right? Our generation, my generation, is nowhere near as self-aware as the Gen Z generation. So I'm delighted actually at the responses of this survey, because it shows you that this generation is in tune with what is actually fundamentally impacting their overall health. So sleep is essential to mental health. This generation, the Gen Z generation, has some of the worst mental health outcomes of any generation. So high levels of stress and anxiety and depression, and sleep directly correlates with all of those mental health issues. So great. I actually, it gives me optimism that we might not be as doomed as I sometimes fear we are. So yes, go Gen Z. I have 2 Gen Z myself. I'm not sure how aware they are of sleep, but anyway, I'm happy that as a generation they are. So it's great. I think their concentration on those fundamental things is really going to drive our whole industry in the direction that has a quantifiable impact on health, right? So it's really it's good news.
And I think it's interesting as well, looking at the differences between current students and future students, and that future students are also thinking about that impact of sleep on mental health perhaps before it started, and that's becoming part of their decision making, and they're really concentrating on that as well, and thinking about how they can support their well-being when they're at university.
Yeah, and I would say that as an industry, right, of real estate, as folks who create these buildings, we need to be more knowledgeable than our tenants, right? We need to be ahead of our tenants. So if our tenants have already made the connection between their sleep quality and their overall well-being and their overall health, we as an industry need to have more knowledge and be ahead of that rather than the demand leading it, I would say, right? In order to future-proof our real estate assets, we need to understand what this means for the future of buildings. So that's obviously something that the evidence base can tell us, right? It's not a mystery, but I think it's a very loud signal from the market what now is being demanded and what will be demanded in future.
It's interesting. I think from an operator's perspective, I think what's interesting is that the noise issue is often a flashpoint for bringing issues to the table. We were talking about presenting symptoms, and I think sometimes it's that inability. So, for example, I was warden at one residence where there was a guy who was working nights as well as studying. He was a chef, and so he was working overnight and studying. And when he'd get home, he'd be sleeping during the day, and he'd have people above him, very, very noisy individuals above him. And all of a sudden, there was this flashpoint, and he was in an enormous amount of mental distress over this, and that happens, on a relatively regular basis. And of course, and we're talking about students now, but also there are extra things to consider in that design area. So, for example, we're doing far more now in the neurodiversity ASD sort of design element in our recent bid. Background noise, for example, is one of the key things that we're trying to deal with and shut out. So, silly things like background noise from extractor fans in the bathroom. A lot of we set up a little focus group of students with ASD, and we've got an amazing insight into the small things that they find particularly difficult. Everything from an extractor fan, lights in the bedroom, certain type of furniture fabrics, that type of thing. So I think we're definitely going into a period where we're putting a lot more focus into that type of area.
I think it's back to the original question. I think, as you said, Joanna, it's brilliant that students are recognizing the importance of sleep, and I think people in general don't recognize the importance of sleep, and there's some amazing books about sleep and the benefits it has. And Jon's point there, when a number of years ago when I was starting out in PBSA, we used to stay in halls, and we'd kind of, if you ever slept in a studio where there's a fridge whirring away in the background 24/7, like say there's an extractor fan or something going on, and it's actually really difficult to get to sleep in halls. And then if it's the middle of summer, it's a bit hot, and all those things that I think we're starting to address now, rather than this is a cluster flat, this is how it looks, and we've put fancy facilities in, but actually the importance of that room being comfortable. It's a bit like hotel rooms, isn't it? When there's a load of noise going on, you're not going to have the best sleep anyway in a different bed more often than not. But for students particularly, it's one thing saying we all sleep at night, but 18-year-olds sleep at different times, and in some extent that's natural, in some extent that's how they live their life, but they still need sleep at different times of the day. So I think, as you say, it's brilliant that that's recognized, and I think we could probably all learn a lot from Gen Z by the sounds of things, because I think we all need to know a bit more about sleep.
I remember, Scott and I used to work together years ago, and we would stay in buildings. And the thing that strikes me when I was trying to sleep in student accommodation is the slamming of doors, the fire doors constantly, and the bing bong of the lift. And, we've all experienced that in hotels, but that may be for 1 or 2 nights. We really need to kind of adjust, I guess, those expectations that, students can be living in buildings, and, non-students beyond graduation for years. And what you could kind of put up with for 1 night is something that you just cannot put up with, for a year or more. But, is there a line of where the landlord, which is effectively what we're talking about in the rented sector, should or shouldn't be responsible for their well-being of their residents?
I mean, if I'm putting my real estate hat on, I would say it is in your interest to be involved in the well-being of your residents, because you're directly responding to market demand, right? So if we can tell you there's a direct correlation between tenant satisfaction and the more you do to support the health and wellness of your residents. Direct correlation, and that obviously then correlates directly with financial outcomes. So if you want to optimize the financial outcome of the financial viability of your property, it pays literally for you to optimize that environment and really respond to the demand of your tenants, whether they're students, whether they're adults, whether they're seniors. This is a market demand. If you don't do it, others will. And then you obviously are going to start to experience negative impact. So this is the big shift for health. Like I said, before COVID, it was a nice to have. You could positively differentiate your real estate by promoting health. Now it is seen as essential, a necessity, and you're going to start to have negative consequences if you cannot show how you're promoting health and wellness of your occupants, or in all asset classes, actually. So I think if you want to, reduce your risk, your financial risk, then you will absolutely be paying very close attention to the health and wellness of your residents and see it as a financial necessity and not just as a nice to have.
I think also the student and the student sector is different, and I'm sure many other sectors would think that about themselves. But I worked on the accommodation cost survey last year with Unipol, and we actually called for recognition that students are different, and that, as you say, Sarah, when it becomes a landlord and a tenant relationship, that somewhere in between that, I suppose, is a lot of PBSA providers doing the right thing and acting very differently to a private landlord. And that is partly around market differentiation, but also there is students are a different type of tenant, a very different cohort with different demands, different expectations. It's definitely in our interest to do all these extra things that we try and do for the sector and for our residents and for our students. But I think ultimately they are different anyway, albeit that's not necessarily the legal answer, and maybe it should be.
Jon, have you got any views on that kind of, you're in a sort of different space with your university partners, is there a line that the landlord operator shouldn't cross when it comes to well-being?
Well, going back to Joanna's point, I agree entirely. I mean, if our key discipline at UPP is occupancy, being very sort of pounds and pence about it, then you need to do that stuff. And I also think that certainly in our model, because we're based usually on the centre of campus, that sort of duty of care is automatically transferred to you, and if you are there as the university's operator of choice, then you need to be delivering what it is that the university see as their duty of care. So yeah, totally, I think landlords should.
Jo, do you think that from what you can see from sort of young people's demands, that they expect it?
I think Joanna's absolutely spot on. It's become one of those must-have factors that now is completely baked into the student experience, and that expectation is just there. I think the link between customer satisfaction and satisfaction with the accommodation is really intertwined as well. And I think students, they expect that provision within their accommodation, but also to talk to Jon's point, it's about knowing where to get support and where else students can feel supported throughout their experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a great point, and that is, as a student, right, as an 18-year-old, I'm not distinguishing between the person running the residential property and the university as a whole. Right, I'm just thinking I'm at university and I need these resources in order to thrive. Right, I'm not distinguishing between this is privately owned real estate compared to this is run by the university, or what, right? It just, again, I happen to have two good case studies here. Well, they're actually back at university, of course, but yeah, so I agree. I mean, it's reputational for the university as well. I mean, look at some of like many of the stats that are used to distinguish universities themselves are around obviously student satisfaction and student quality of life, and those kind of aspects are very influential in decision making of students about where they choose to go to university. And then obviously, not obviously, but actually the data shows us that people generally are more willing and more likely to actually promote the accommodation they're in when they have all of these aspects. So you have a higher likelihood of somebody recommending your property to friends and peers as you do more to support their health. Again, the research shows us this direct correlation. So it's definitely now, it's big business, right? It's financial. That's why I mentioned ESG at the beginning, right? This is all about risk now. This is about material risk to real estate. Health is now part of that conversation.
I think we see our position as delivering baseline what the initiatives the university want us to deliver, but then on top of that, creating added value by dialing in the benefits of having 35,000 rooms. So we have, specific programs on top of the university's base position in terms of student experience, which we can add, if you like, on top of that. So I mean, and to Joanna's point, it's baked in.
I think we should also remember now that I think it was 60% of students living in PBSA and not in university buildings. The private sector is such a size now where many rooms are privately owned and maybe not even tied to universities at all. And the importance of those relationships on a two-way thing. There's formal arrangements like with UPP. There's also a number of private providers who don't have those formal arrangements with universities, who in some cases would love to, and in some cases perhaps haven't tried yet. But building those relationships before something terrible happens is so important. And there's still a number of providers and universities who can do more in a positive way to bring that about, I think.
One thing that I think Jo and Scott, I think you both have touched on it, is customer service. And we were really surprised in our research and in our focus groups how much of an impact the respondents said that customer service has on their well-being. They just cited things like dealing with complaints, being a distraction, being a waste of time, being frustrating. So are we, I guess, kind of overlooking the impact maybe of customer service in lieu of shiny facilities?
I did actually find that stat quite a surprising one, but I think again it supports that need to be considering the whole student experience, the whole satisfaction, and how accommodation fits within that as well. Some of the things that you were saying earlier, I'm a big advocate of experiencing the accommodation as a student. So what you were saying, Sarah, about, and Scott, about actually going and staying in halls and experiencing that is absolutely brilliant, because the need for accommodation providers to be thinking about the reality of university life, and some of the research that talked about things like natural light, that might be something that you don't really think about until you're in those environments. Things like a comfortable chair for the studying that you're doing, these things are kind of really important to the experience and kind of how those spaces and facilities are being used. And I think there's also some really interesting differences in there about the different groups. So what people see pre-arrival or what's important to them versus when they're actually experiencing it, and anything that we can do to help students understand what that experience might be like before they've experienced it, I think is hugely important, and that kind of increasing the transparency of the experience and the reality.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the natural light, because natural light is a theme across all of us humans. We need natural light, right? We need natural light actually to maintain our circadian rhythm, right? So it goes back to that sleep thing. If you aren't getting enough daylight during the day, then you are actually not going to have an optimum circadian rhythm, which is going to affect your sleep pattern, which is obviously going to affect your overall health, your risk of diabetes, heart disease, mental health issues, all of the above. So yeah, the natural light piece directly correlates with mental health outcomes. So again, the fact that that is something that folks are recognizing it's fantastic. They are way ahead of the older generations in understanding the correlation or feeling the correlation and then articulating it as need, rather than just thinking like it's a shrug, like, of course I need natural light, but actually demanding it and saying, I am choosing this because it has good light, right? That will change the market, right? We will respond to that demand as folks who build buildings. And I actually love the framing of this whole panel, and that the conversation we're having now, like, students absolutely have a specific set of needs. The industry has a specific set of performance indicators, which are different than other aspects of residential real estate. However, this is an amazing insight into the future of the market, right? Because what these 18-year-olds are demanding today, you better believe they are going to be demanding it when they are in the workforce and looking for that first home, or looking to, for somewhere to settle. So I think that it's really valuable insight into this shift of focus as far as folks really now wanting to and understanding the correlation between where they live and their overall health.
I think that speaks to that notion of developing your innovation ecosystem, for want of a better word. I mean, because I think so we're sampling our 35,000 students every year. The response, normally we get between 4,000 and 5,000 students responding, which is not too bad. But I mean, some of the things that we've done on the basis of that, particularly with Joanna was talking about, which always, in the last few years, we've changed our fenestration treatment, just to have the full length windows, because we know that light is so important. I mean, of course, the other thing I noticed, I enjoyed the mattress findings very early on, probably late, so like 2010. We actually used our national provider to redesign the mattress. So what was happening was students liked to sit on the corner of their mattress, and all the mattresses were sort of, lasting 3 years or however long it was. They were certainly, we were getting through mattresses left, right and center. So we actually designed mattresses that were firmer in the corner so students could sit down on them. And I think we're probably the only operator to do that, maybe not.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Very deliberate. Yeah, very deliberate. And of course that speaks to the fact that, at a group level, we have the sort of equivalent of a net promoter score as a key KPI. I mean, it has to be a key KPI. So you have to have that innovation ecosystem. Otherwise, your occupancy will be damaged.
Definitely. I just bought my goodness knows how many mattress topper. It's actually waiting for delivery right now because of exactly this conversation with my 19-year-old. So I shan't name the university.
Are you seeing anything across Europe around customer service and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, the pilot survey in the Netherlands showed, underpin the importance of customer service, and one of the challenges of us framing the European-wide piece is around, the brief began as facilities and understanding PBSA, but actually the people in there are a huge part of that. And all those things, I've had lots of conversations over the last couple of months really about automating, back to post or any of these things, maintenance, but all these things are touch points, and I suppose underpin the well-being piece as well, that maintenance staff who have an awareness of mental health first aid, or reception staff who understand some of the signs to look for, who are seeing people, is so important. And those interactions build that piece and create a thriving community. So the customer service piece, I think your original question was, has that been overlooked for shiny facilities? I think there's definitely scenarios where we may be moving away from people in some areas, but again, I think some of the outcomes last week, when talking about how community managers in London had responded to COVID and what they were doing differently, students still wanted to see people. And I think it's easy to say, oh, they're 18 and they're, my wife said to my nephew the other day, "You on Instagram?" thinking that was cool, and he kind of gave her a funny look. Of course he wasn't. And so all those things that I think Joanna said earlier, we have to know what they want and know more than them, but that's the joy of this kind of cohort, isn't it? They're always, you know, many steps ahead of most of the people working in the sector. So listening to them and talking to them like this and understanding what they really need, but actually people they can interact with and connections and people who make them feel safe are like continue to be really important.
Yeah, we had a big revelation in our field. So, you know, we translate public health research. Public health research actually hadn't really looked at maintenance of buildings, right? So there's lots of research around air quality and water quality and actually in sound and so on, but there wasn't a substantial body of research around the impact that maintenance of properties has, the ongoing maintenance, right? Yes, you can build it, but you need to maintain that property. And so we actually did some original research with UC Berkeley over on the West Coast of America. And we found that maintenance has the biggest impact on trust. So a well-maintained building and well-maintained grounds of that building had a really substantial impact on trust for the residents, but poorly maintained green space and poorly maintained grounds had the largest impact on trust of all of the other variables that we looked at, which was an aha moment for us, right? We previously, with active design and with all the work that we were doing, we were not concentrating, we were not talking about the ongoing maintenance of properties until that moment. And now obviously it rose, it was a surprise. We were not expecting that to be the thing that had the greatest impact on trust. And of course, trust has been really undermined because of COVID. Social isolation is obviously mitigated by a lack of trust. If you don't trust your neighbors, if you don't trust your community, you don't go out into that community, you then become more social isolated. Social isolation impacts your mental health, but it also just straight up impacts your life expectancy. Right? It is as detrimental to life expectancy as smoking or physical inactivity. So I think that, you know, each time like a piece of research like you guys have just done comes out, it adds to our knowledge, and we each time have a bit of an aha moment. And collectively, I do feel like collectively we have a huge amount of information that we can pull together and translate into the sector, which is, again, why I'm optimistic that now the demand is there. We can make that financial argument for why you should be prioritizing this.
I mean, one thing that was clear that came out of our research is that young people aren't willing to pay for wellbeing support. Therefore, you know, we could argue that it's a given, you know, that it should just be there. But, you know, what we've just discussed around customer service and around maintenance, that is people, and people cost money. You know, the highest, you know, or you know, the highest cost in a building, you know, should be their staff, really. You know, and how, I guess, you know, how viable is it to operate a building that has enough staff to, you know, successfully look after their students in all of these, you know, these ways, you know, and is it something that should be passed on to the residents?
Well, I think my view is that it's a hygiene factor, and I think in the customer service area, I think there's a space for the authenticity of what customer service looks like. So I think if I look at our customer satisfaction results, the thing that keeps coming up time and time again is the relationship of students to cleaners and maintenance people and communication. And I think we ask our teams to be just more than a cleaner or a maintenance person. We ask them, we train them to understand the signs of, you know, mental illness, or, you know, if a student hasn't come out of their room, we want them to signpost it to our teams, whether it's the warden's teams or the operational teams. And I think there's something about that empowering your teams to take on that role. You know, then they don't become counsellors, but they become people who signpost things. And I think we like to feel that we can empower them to do that, because I think that's one of the key sort of differences between maybe ourselves and other companies.
I think as well, we've talked already today about expectations being really high, but I think they're constantly evolving as well as the sector evolves and develops. One thing that we've really noticed is that students, they want their wellness to be catered for as part of the whole package. So we're seeing a real emphasis on kind of tailored support, so support for different student groups, whether that's disabled students, they've got different needs, and they're actually seeking out that support. And we've looked at this in some of our research reports as well about the different needs of different student groups, and ensuring that support is available once students get to university.
We've had a question come in from Alyssa Johnson, who's asked, do universities limit the ability of landlords and operators from delivering on health and wellness measures? So do universities need to help move the needle, or is it down to the landlord or operator? Any of you got any views on that? Yes, John, you're probably the best person to answer that. Who's pulling and who's pushing?
Well, I think universities have the commercial ability to, I wouldn't say enforce, but they have the capacity to encourage their residential partners to deliver a certain level of customer service and a level of well-being. And I think they're in a very strong position to be able to do that. They certainly do it with us. So I'm sure they also do it with direct let providers.
Just want to move on for a moment about study space. So we're now in an era where working from home is the norm, as many of us are today. Yet studying at university isn't that different to studying in the workplace. Yet when working from home, we're encouraged not to have our desk in the bedroom and not to have our laptop open at night, etc. But student accommodation always has a desk in the bedroom. Is this impacting mental well-being, and what alternatives have you either seen or can suggest to that kind of traditional desk in the bedroom scenario?
You could easily, never mind your bedroom, you could not leave your bed, couldn't you? You could sit there with a laptop and a wireless controller, and you go into students' rooms and you sort of think, I wonder when you last went outside. Sometimes that really happens, and they're the type of signs that I suppose we look for and try and help people. I think the flip of that is I think when I went to university, I don't think I initially took a computer. I think I took it back at Christmas because I was going to go to the library and all that kind of stuff. And then we had internet put in halls. It's a bit different to that now. And there is literally no barrier to taking your laptop to the shared kitchen, the communal area, the library, the student union, whatever it may be, for students to collaborate. So I think it's about seizing those opportunities for working from anywhere or studying from anywhere, as opposed to the sort of limitation. But certainly, that's a great example of where we have to look out for people, that there are students who have never had the ability or the opportunity to, I suppose, on one hand look after themselves, but on the other one do whatever they want all day, and they will sometimes. So yeah, I think it's that side, but actually the opportunity there is great, I think.
I mean, I would actually, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is such a hot topic to the student experience. I mean, particularly during the pandemic, but even longer term, we've seen that some students can really struggle with that transition, that step up to higher education, and adjusting to that university environment and trying not to feel that pressure to study all the time and overstudy and not get that distinction between downtime and study time. And I think accommodation providers can really help with that. I think as well, though, that kind of expectation, I don't know if anyone else on the panel could ever imagine being able to sell a room without a desk in a bedroom. I mean, it just seems difficult to really imagine. But I think the other kind of hot topic for university providers is that there's such an association of study with the library, that kind of breaking down some of those spaces and offering them in other alternatives is a real challenge, I think, for the sector, and looking at how that kind of separate study space or group work, solo work might be integrated into accommodation is a really interesting topic.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this in the residential market, right? We're seeing now residential developers including shared workspaces within residential properties. So cover your ears, all of my partners on the commercial side of real estate, because that is not what you want to hear. But it is happening, and it's happening with new builds right now. This is where I would say that this is where the university has like at least as much responsibility, if not more. Like I think as housing providers, this industry can provide space, alternative options for someone to be able to study in a shared environment compared to in their room within that residential property. But it's really up to the university to educate as far as study habits, as far as, you know, when it's a group project, when you need to be doing this on your own, right? This is kind of where I begin to say, like, okay, you as a provider of physical space and of amenities are about the living part of the kind of the quality of life of the students in that way. I would push back a little bit on the universities here that they're the ones who should be taking the lead on encouraging students to work in all sorts of different environments. It is unquestionably bad for your mental health to be looking at a laptop at 2 a.m, right? I mean, it just is. So yeah, but mitigating that social isolation is definitely a shared responsibility as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I guess in the schemes that we've been doing, certainly in the last 5 years, that notion of, you know, tech-enabled sort of peer learning space has really become very, very important. And I think some of the early adopters, people like Charlie McGregor and Student Hotel, had already been doing that for a number of years. So I think I wouldn't say that we're coming, you know, we're early to the party, but at the same time, if you look at our later schemes, there are those schemes that are effectively taking the place of an overcrowded library and allowing students to be in the residential context, but working together, you know, in large open spaces that facilitate that peer learning. And I think that's yeah, definitely something that we're designing for right now.
I think it would be remiss of us not to talk about the cost of living as something that's impacting anxiety in young people. One thing that our respondents of our survey felt the landlord had a responsibility to do is to offer different options and different prices and different solutions. Again, you know, what's your view on that, and how university accommodation and build to rent, you know, is really impacting anxiety when it comes to money concerns? It's a difficult one.
Jump in if nobody else has. I mean, I think the affordability issue is obviously going to be that and of course the maintenance loan provision, which I notice has been entirely ignored by the government. You know, soon we're going to have the new bill coming out, probably by the end of September, which will look at all sort of the way that the sector is regulated for quality, and it will be looking at student fee caps. What do they look like? Are they going up? They probably will be going up. They're frozen at the moment, but that situation is not tenable in the long term, because the unit of resource that universities have has been withering effectively. So I think the unit of resource now is the same as it was effectively in 2006, because you've frozen tuition fees since 2015 essentially, and allowed inflation to eat away at them. So I guess from our perspective, we recognize that we're not going to be able to pass through contractual rents to students. It's just not possible. You know, we can't be passing through an RPI increase, which we are entitled to, but we can't do it. And so it's about taking a long-term view in terms of, you know, our shareholders and investors. You have to take a long-term view. We're in it for 50 years. We're not going anywhere, and the scheme will work over that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, you need a stable living environment in order to thrive, whether you're 18, 35, or 80. So we, as a society, I am American, but I'm British still, I guess. We as a society do have, it's in our interest, right, to have stable living environments for all generations. So if a student isn't in student accommodation, they have to live somewhere. So where are they living? They're living at home, or they're living in rentals that are just in the marketplace, which is going to have all sorts of other issues with that rental market within a community. So I think we also need to be looking at the cost of student accommodation in that larger kind of context of having enough affordable living units for every aspect of the population, right? Students aren't unique in needing to have accommodation that is affordable and that is safe and stable. So I do think that this is not just on the not just on the owners of private student accommodation, but also on how do we as a society prioritize stable housing, because that's what we're talking about, really, right? The fact that students is, I mean, that's what they do for a job, right? But they still need that. So I don't know the answer to that, but I think I can certainly make an economic argument as to why this is something that government should be looking at in that larger context of population stability. Yeah, I don't want to wade into the UK economy. I don't know it as well as I would need to.
There are two key strands, aren't there? And one is the ability, you're talking of PBSA and affordability, the ability to run PBSA cheaply, as it were, cheaper, is very difficult. And right now, any scheme is becoming more and more expensive. In order to, looking at viability of schemes is a challenge in the current market. And that's where the narrative, I think, has flipped slightly over the last 10 years to actually, or certainly people in the sector saying, well, what about student finance? Because the reality is many of these student finance numbers are kind of made up, and they've stuck around because they've always been around, and they bear no necessarily sort of relevance to accommodation fees or how the cost of living. So the challenge students face, because in a cost of living context, I suppose, exacerbates that. But student finance in general is a huge issue. And then the other part of that will be the cost of living crisis and the effect on parents who had plans to fund their student or support their student, or their children, who perhaps they can do that less or not at all than they had hoped to. So there's a number of things happening there which will cause an issue. But I think the fundamental point in amongst that in a student context remains the student finance angle.
Yeah, I mean, look at the US if you want to see what the alternative looks like, right where I'm based. Incredible levels of debt coming out of for students, right? So 21-year-old, 22-year-old with huge lifetime amount of debt, which they then have to pay and service throughout their life, which means they have less money in order to buy their first home, raise their family, et cetera, et cetera. And guess what? The US government has just seen that it is in the country's interest to wipe out that student debt. So you can either support students at the beginning of their journey, or you can get to a crisis point like the US is in right now, where that student debt is now inhibiting the entire economy, right? Because you have generations now of individuals who are saddled with untenable amounts of debt, which obviously impacts not just their financial health, but it absolutely impacts their mental health and their physical health as well. So there's a cost to educating our society, but there's also a benefit to having an educated society. So I think we need to be looking at it in that largest of economic frameworks, in my opinion, if I was setting policy, which I'm not, unfortunately.
We're seeing the highest percentage of current students thinking that affordable living costs are important to supporting their well-being than we've ever seen before. And we're seeing applicants as well look at kind of mitigation strategies. So can they get a part-time job? Can they ask for extra financial support from families as well? So it's going to have a huge impact on students now and in the future.
I think Sarah's on mute, but that's great. I think that is a brilliant end to a great discussion, actually, and a really good intro into our next webinar series, which will be on affordability. We'll be discussing kind of more of these topics and go a lot more deeper into that very kind of important and topical question that we have right now. But a big thank you to all of you. That was, as we predicted, a fascinating conversation. So thank you for your expertise. I think, I agree with all of you that, I think all the research is telling us that we have a much more demanding generation, which I think is a good thing. And for kind of operators and developers and investors out there, it's about, if you want to be a successful commercial environment, you need to build well-being into the building. So I think hopefully we've got a good positive step for a bright future going forward. As I said, the next webinar series we'll be discussing is affordability. That webinar will be held on the 11th of October, which people can book onto now. So please go to our website and register your interest, and then you'll receive the updates on that. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram to keep up to date with the release of our research, the release of the affordability pillar and the final research at the end of the year. The full report will be available at the end of the year, and sorry, my phone's going. And the mini reports will give you a lot more information than what will be in that final report. So do go onto our website and check out all our former reports that we've already released and forthcoming ones that we have coming. A big thank you once again to UPP for their support throughout the whole of this project. It's been fascinating, the volume of data that we've got and we've analysed, and we thank you to UPP for their support in delivering this back to the sector. And also a big thank you to UCAS for partnering with us on this session. They're kind of at the heart of young people when they start out on this journey, and they have that unique relationship. So it's great to have you on board to support us. So thank you. And a big thank you to all our sponsors across all of our pillars, which is Loft, UCAS, Apudus and CoLib. So thank you. Thank you everyone. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And a big thank you once again to our brilliant panel.